So I'm here with Rabbi David Jaffe, who's going to be giving the D'var Torah for the May 6th celebration of my 25 years in the rabbinate and to celebrate our staff here at Beth Emet. And I wanted to have a conversation with David so that you could get to know Rabbi Jaffe and hear what he's going to be talking about and get excited for the weekend. I've known Rabbi Jaffe for 30 years before there was a rabbi in front of his name or in front of my name when we were in Jerusalem in the early 90s and then in New York when he was studying at Columbia and at JTS. And then he went back to Israel to be ordained as a rabbi, but he also worked for 5 years as a community organizer in Boston. And what I knew about Rabbi Jaffe from that period of time is his brilliance and his great soulfulness. And his career has shown that he has continued to develop in both of those areas so beautifully. And in 2016, shortly after the election, I think many of us were thinking about how do we approach what's happening in the world. And many people were worried about where things were going in our country. I had been leading a spiritual practice group for many, many years at Beth Emet on Saturday afternoons once a month. And so we were trying to figure out what we wanted to study for that year. And I came across Rabbi Jaffe's book, Changing the World from the Inside Out, in which he explores how Musar, about how improving ourselves internally can make an impact on how we work in the world. And I thought to myself, this is exactly what we want to be talking about. And it's a beautiful book that really talks about the core of what I think it means to be a Jewish person, which is that we're trying to grow in the ways of God, trying to improve ourselves so that we not just to gaze at our own navel, so that we can actually make a difference in the world around us. As we like to say, the prayer that we do is not just what happens in the synagogue, but it's how we lead our lives. As I've often taught at Beth Emet, Ani tefillati lecha, I am my prayer to you, O God, that our lives should be a prayer. But it's hard to make our lives a prayer unless we've done the internal work. And so Rabbi Jaffe wrote this wonderful book about how our internal work affects what we do in the world. Rabbi Jaffe uh, is uh, is now exploring how to walk a holy path that integrates deep spiritual wisdom with the daily work of peacemaking and social change. I love how he wrote that, and he believes in the importance that our work should be connected to people, our moral integrity and community, and that we should do our social justice work um, through this lens so that we might ground and elevate our social justice work. And I love how you use that expression, ground and elevate. How does doing the internal work of Musar, of Tikkun Midot, help us to ground and to elevate our Jewish social justice work, Rabbi Jaffe?
Well, before even jumping into that, I just have to say it's a real joy to be here with you, Rabbi London, and to get to, intersect again. I've really been enjoying watching your career since we knew each other as young adults back in seminary days, and you really live, I feel like you're in your rabbinate, the kind of things that I'm writing about in this book of the real integration of deep spirituality and action justice in the world. So I just want to say that up front. Grounding and elevating. I think that Musar, as many in your community are familiar with Midot, is a very practical discipline, a practical Jewish spirituality that takes place in the way we talk with our families and the way we talk with our colleagues and people we work with, and it's a daily practice. So I feel like that's grounding. It's taking Jewish wisdom, which is Musar is 1,000-year-old genre, but actually goes back to the Torah itself of be holy because I am holy, love your neighbor as yourself, all these great teachings, which are these teachings of how do we walk in the ways of God, right? Which is a very elevated type of thing, but we ground them in the way that I talk to my spouse and the way that I talk to my children. So that's the grounding element of the spirituality. And then the elevation is it takes things that are very daily, the way I do the dishes, the way I bring out the garbage, the way I do my community organizing and how I talk to people, but infuses it with a God consciousness and a consciousness that this is walking in the ways of God. And so that's the elevation where both of
Hmm.
those happen, which is, I think, one of the, Judaism is a religion of finding that spark of holiness in the daily things, in that where it doesn't seem spiritual the way that I, I don't know, pay my taxes or write a check to someone or do those things. But that's what Judaism is about, is finding the spark of holiness in that. And Musar is the discipline that aligns us, it aligns our behavior with our deepest values, and which I think is holiness. And living that way is living holiness. And that's what attracted me so much to Musar when I first got exposed to it over 20 years ago, was that level of integration of the daily practical with the holy and elevated.
So there may be people who look around and see what's happening in the world, the environmental crisis, the racial justice issues that we're facing in this country, and I could go on and on and on about the crises we're facing in our world. And they'll say to me, Rabbi, who has time for the spiritual stuff? Who has time for prayer or study when there's just so much work that needs to be done in the world? How do you address that question?
I'd say it, I flip it. It's like, who doesn't have time? These things are so hard. I mean, we are facing such big, challenging things. I don't know if you experience this the way but just feel like things have gotten a lot harder. It feels like, since we were young adults, or since, in a bunch of different issues. And so really that's more my sense of, if we don't make time to nurture the spiritual, which there's a couple ways into this. One is the way that like allows us to stay in the work because we feel nourished because of the spiritual, and there's then because of the vision that I feel like the spiritual gives us when we connect into things that are not just in the material world but more the spiritual. There's another angle we get to look at things, and things are a little more holistic. So things can seem very binary a lot of times in the world, of this or that, good, evil, this. A perspective that brings in a sense of spirituality, a sense of God, a sense of something that's more connected horizontally through history, it gives us a different angle, of a way of looking at problems and looking at challenges we have. And I think hope can spring from that when we get a different picture. And then being involved in practices that are self-nourishing, that are also communal, because Jewish spirituality is not a solo practice. Jewish spirituality is really a communal practice. And so one of the things I love about Musar and the Midot work is that it happens in VODs. And I know, again, your synagogue has been very involved in that. And you have a group of people that you're meeting with regularly, that you're thinking about the most important things in your life and sharing them about how you're trying to grow, how you're trying to be a better parent, how you're trying to be a better activist, that all that connected together, that's just nourishing in and of itself. And so I feel like if we're going to face these issues of everything you just mentioned before, challenges to our democracy, racism, these other things, we need that support by the people that are really close to us, so we can keep nourishing ourselves. And we need new vision of ways of approaching these things. So I think we can't do it without spirituality, is the way
So what are you working on these days? What's your new project?
A couple things I'm working on. One is we have so I wrote this book in 2016, and the timing ended up being good.
Perfect.
I didn't plan on the Trump presidency, but timing ended up being good, of people really feeling this need. And one of the things I realized shortly after writing the book, people told me that they had bought the book, and the book did well. They said they'd bought it and it was on their night table and they were hoping to get to it. And that was like me too. Many, many nonfiction books I have on my night table, which is piled about maybe 15 books high. And so I realized that if I really wanted these teachings to get out in the world, I needed to teach them. And so some colleagues and I, we created something calling the Inside Out Wisdom and Action Project. And that took the book is changing the world from the inside out, and started teaching the teachings there. And so that I've been involved with that for the last 4 years. And the new piece we're working on is around racism. And we're 2 years out from George Floyd's murder and the racial justice uprising of the summer of 2020. And many congregations, Jewish organizations, others have been involved in some type of learning around racism, anti-racism. And what we're offering now is for folks who've done that work to take that a next step and integrate Jewish spiritualism, particularly Musar, deeply into the anti-racism work, to do the how of anti-racism, not the what. I think we know the what of the work at this point. It's the how. How do we challenge these biases that we've have from living in a white supremacist culture in our society. How do we challenge those? Whether you identify as white, black, anything else, we're all, have these things inside us. So what we're doing now is we have an 8-session curriculum we put together that's looking at challenging racism and the hierarchies of care that come from a racialized environment of white on top, black gets the worst care. How do we flip that into a balance of care? And how do we use the midot, humility, patience and anger, courage, truth, and dealing with the lies of racism, looking at the Musar lens on all these things and creating anti-racist practice based in Musar practice. So that's our newest thing that we're out working on, and we're piloting it now, and very excited about it, of actually taking a concern for anti-racism and making it a daily practice, which is what Musar really excels in.
Beautiful and very powerful, as you and I had spoken about its work that we're very deeply engaged in here at Beth Emet as well. Part of it being the first community in the nation to fund reparations, but we've also been doing this work of anti-racism predating the reparations work, and will continue to do so. And we hope to be engaged with you with this work as well. It sounds really incredible what you're doing. Well, we're really looking forward to having you with us the weekend of May 6th, and being able to learn and continue to engage with you. Thank you so much.
Very welcome. I'm really excited to learn with the community.